back to Chat with DBLAC. If you're new here, my name is Samora Curry. I'm currently a sophomore at the University of Pittsburgh studying communications and English literature. I'm also the DBLAC 2022 spring intern. As you can tell, I enjoy to read just based off my major and the fact that I'm doing this book talk with you. But if you ever saw me on campus, you'd probably see me with a fantasy book in hand or most likely a paintbrush and canvas. As you can tell by my background, I love art. But that's enough about me. But here's a little bit about DBLAC. DBLAC is a learning community that centers on expanding Black knowledge and offers resources to Black learners to further their understanding of what it means to be Black and what it means to occupy white spaces as Black people and how to support them in finding a community. This week, we will be discussing How to Go Mad Without Losing Yourself by Dr. Marr Jurelle Bruce, I believe. And he is an interdisciplinary humanities scholar, cultural and literary critic, and associate professor of American Studies at the University of Maryland. His book was published by Duke University Press, and it's around 230 pages, excluding the notes on the individual chapters at the end. So we're just going to jump right in. Just some fun things you need to know about this book. This book, despite its length, isn't the type of book that you want to read without the opportunity to discuss its context. What I mean is it's a good discussion book. It demands reflection and a community. I also recommend that you don't try to rush through it, since 230 pages for most of us, if we read a lot, may seem like not that much of a daunting task. However, this book is very deep and it goes into a lot of deep discussions, whether that's with definitions or larger concepts. So I definitely recommend, if you're going to pick up that book, that you maybe pick it up with a buddy, you do like a little mini book club. But I also think that classes should be discussing this book. I think you would do well in a class, and I think the definitions and just the ideas that are proposed would be really good for a class discussion, just because there's so many ways that you can interpret things, especially the definition of madness that is provided by Mr. Bruce, or Dr. Bruce, I guess it would be more correct. And to go further into that, he gives us 3 opening definitions of madness. And some of them I was very intrigued by, because I, like probably so many of you reading this, only had one preconceived notion of madness. So if you want to follow along, the first definition of madness would be, they're all in chapter 1. The first one starts on page 6, not chapter, but the first one is called phenomenal madness, which he describes as an intense, unruly of mind, producing fundamental crises of perception, emotion, meaning, and selfhood as experienced in the consciousness of the mad subject. This is very distinct from the next form of madness. So basically with this one, it's more like body dysmorphia, like what you see and what is consciously happening in your head do not align, but it is without the label of some type of mental illness that could describe the disconnect between your conscious and whatever you were perceiving. The second definition of madness that he gives is medicalized madness, which encompasses a range of serious mental illnesses and psychopathologics co-defined by the psych sciences and psychiatric, psychological, psychosis. Essentially, these are your typical mental illnesses, or what people would stereotypically think of when they think of madness. Someone with schizophrenia, someone with multi-personality disorder, or BPD. Then the third type of madness he goes into is rage, an affective state of intense aggressive displeasure, which is usually phenomenal but warrants analytical distinction from the unruliness above. And what I thought of was quite literally the African American experience, because I feel like we are often filled with, if not just rage for our current experiences, generational rage, where our parents are explaining things that happen to them that we will most likely have to go through. Usually it's like a protective barrier, like they're warning us in advance. But over time, like that tends to build rage. Like we get upset, like why do we have to mentally prepare for police brutality? Or why do we need to know how to handle interacting with an officer? Like why are other people not going through this? And we tend to get angry and resentment starts to build. And we just keep passing that down because we keep doing the same thing with each generation. And like, personally, like I've never looked at rage as a type of madness, but after reading this, it started to make sense. I'm not like an inherently like very rage-filled person, so I think it's more like a bias of my own. But I did think about it because I was like, I have definitely seen people who are like very angry. I speak at protests, so I've definitely like been angry like in that moment, and I definitely know people who I think become blind to their rage or influenced by their rage. I don't want to say motivated by it because I feel like it gives it like a positive inclination, and I feel like it's usually more negative, but that's also like up to your discretion. But after like further analysis, I was like, okay, yes, I can see how this plays out. But I did also think that the phenomenal madness was interesting just because it's kind of the like, it's like, it's just taking the label out of the medicalized madness. It's like trying to dissect why you have this like separation between your consciousness and whatever you're being like, whatever you're perceiving as reality, even if it isn't, without an illness. It's more focused on like the individual person rather than the diagnosis, if that makes any sense. However, that was really interesting. And I think that understanding those fundamental, like those three different fundamental types of madness really play out in the rest of the book because it makes you question certain actions or how, like when madness would start to develop based off of certain scenarios. And I think one of those scenarios is in chapter 3, there's a section called I Said Nothing on silence and violence, which piqued my interest because I'm currently writing a short story that centers on Black people choosing to remain silent instead of defending themselves. And the quote that stood out to me is on page 92 of chapter 3. I think, as I said before, that it was in chapter 3, but if I didn't, just covering my bases. And it says, silence itself is less the absolute limit of discourse, the other side from which it is separated by a strict boundary, than an element that functions alongside the things said, with them and in relation to them, within over other strategies. There is not one, but many silences, and they are an integral part of the strategies that underline and permeate discourses. And this offers a new way to look at silence. Instead of viewing it as a weakness or a lack of language or lack of accountability, it becomes power. It's like, no one has the right to know my story, right? But me. Even though arguably there are moments maybe we should break our silence, but there's also the fact that Black people break our silence and our words and our truth are looked down upon. They don't hold the same weight as white speech. And so there's this like developing, like, why do I speak anyway if my words aren't going to hold the same weight as like this white person who you're often probably arguing against. And I think like in this moment, that's how we can see like where madness would start to form, if that makes any sense. Like, because that can be a generational thing, and there's going to be like some separation in your consciousness there, because like you're going to perceive your words as having the same weight, but like, or you're consciously going to think that your words have the same weight, but like your perception of it is obviously not. Like you can think of the American justice system, like you're on the stand just as everyone else is, so your consciousness is thinking you have the same chances as everyone else, but your words are like more likely to be silenced in court, whether it's because you're a woman or because you're Black, or if you're both, God forbid. And it's like instances like that you would then tell your children about, and then like you're going to warn them like, hey, like it's not always great to talk. So then it becomes this generational thing, which is where we get madness as rage, because like you're going to be upset, especially if it's a justice system thing, like with the police. Like we had riots because of like police brutality, because like that's a generational rage thing. And it's like we can see where madness forms, and like we understand like why we choose to not speak. And not speaking is just as powerful as speaking, because it's like knowing when or not, or knowing where to put your energy and when your energy is going to be the most influential, I think is the word that I'm looking for. But it's like, do you agree with me? Like, you could completely disagree with me. Like, have you remained silent, and do you regret it? Like, I know I personally remain silent. I'm just non-confrontational. I also am team, like, I'm not giving you my energy. I'm sorry. So like, I often choose to stay silent, and I don't fully know if I like really care. Like, I think it depends. Because I also speak up. Like, I spoke at several like BLM protests. I usually don't advocate for myself. I will gladly advocate for others. I think that's kind of my personal stance on it. But like, I have definitely like remained silent for myself in moments where I probably should not have. But there are also moments where it's like, frankly, you don't get to know my side of the story, and I don't really care about your opinion on like my Blackness or whatever I did to demonstrate my Blackness, or how I chose to claim space. Like, I just do not care. So I choose silence for that, but maybe you don't. And like, that's okay. Like, that's like completely okay. And it doesn't make you weak. It doesn't mean that you lack language. It doesn't mean that you aren't being held accountable, depending on the circumstances. And I feel like it's ironic that we look at silence as such a bad thing, because it's kind of built into the foundation of our country. Like, we have the Fifth Amendment, where you can like, you're like, I just choose not to speak because it will criminalize myself somehow. So it's like, why do we dissect or pick and choose when it is okay, or when we look down on someone for being silent? And there's like this inherent guilt that comes with that, or assumption that you are guilty or you have done something wrong because you choose not to speak. But it's like that, those things do not correlate. Like, I don't know. But I would love to know what your thoughts are about that, just because I think it's fascinating, especially when trying to dissect at what point does a person choose to remain silent? Is there ways for us to like analyze or track that? And like, how does that correlate with madness? At what point does a person remain silent so much that they do start to go mad in those other ways? Especially like the medicalized one, because like people who remain silent, you're not telling your story, you're not building that community, you're self-isolating in a way, and like that can lead to depression, that can lead to anxiety, that can lead to like a whole bunch of other mental illnesses I can't think of right now. But it can have a ricochet effect, and it can lead to anger, and it can lead to rage, and it can lead to a divide between what you're perceiving and your consciousness. And I think it's just interesting to see, where does that overlap? Why does it overlap? And how does it overlap? But for now, I guess I'm leaving you with more questions than I have answers, which I think is very fitting for this book, because as a sophomore in college reading something like this, I had more questions, I think, than answers, just from my own personal perspective on things. But as much as I would love to continue discussing how to go mad without losing your mind, that's all the time that we have for today. I hope you check out our author chat, which is happening on Monday, March. Let me just check the date real fast. It's happening Monday, March 21st. The link to register for that will be in the description box below. I do hope that you check it out. I do hope that you register. Dr. Marr Jurelle Bruce will be exploring his thoughts on some of the central ideas in the book with Ray Moffitt from the University of Chicago. I definitely butchered that name. I am so sorry, but he'll be having a discussion with Ray Moffitt from the University of Chicago. And I really do hope that you guys stop out and get questions answered from the author himself. But once again, thank you for tuning in, and we hope that you stop by soon. I hope that you enjoyed what we did here. And like, I hope that you also have questions. And if you have questions, I really encourage you to like put them in the chat so we can get a discussion going, because frankly, I want to discuss this book more. I have so many questions, and maybe getting some feedback from some of you will help me further my understanding on this book and maybe even change my perspectives a little bit. So I hope you tune into our next chat with DBLAC, and I hope that you register for our author chat. Thank you for tuning in once again, and I hope you have a wonderful day.